Welcome back. We'll continue looking at the headlines this morning. This is the news review on Power Breakfast Citizen TV with me, Fred Indimuli. I'm still in studio with Kipruto Rapkirwa, Deputy Party Leader, ANC, and Mark Bichachi, Analyst and a Communications Consultant. We now want to look at the big headline on the front page of the Standard, revealed why most election petitions fell, and we're looking at the costs that many election petition losers now have to contend with, and it's been spread out on page 4 and 5, and there's one headline that says petitioners will pay cumulatively 500 million shillings after losing election cases. And it's been a big talking point, just because the highlight, after all cases are done, everyone is just waiting to hear, okay, how much will he have to pay? Whoever wins, whoever loses. Some 12 million. Amounts that are not available to the common wananchi, who could also be a litigant in these petitions. Now, page 8 of the Daily Nation, at least it's even more direct. Hefty petition costs alarm appeal judges. They say it's a return to the costly old days, yet there are guidelines to cap costs. The High Court is on the spot over the hefty costs that judges are slapped on unsuccessful petitioners, running into hundreds of millions of shillings. The Court of Appeal has expressed its dismay over the inordinately high amounts of costs slapped on politicians and citizens who agreed with the petition's results and filed petitions in the High Court. These are Judges Mohammed Rasami, Daniel Musinga, Otieno Odek. They've termed the high costs a return to the olden days, when courts were notorious for imposing high costs on election petitions. There are those who argue that, yes, Kenyans are unnecessarily litigious, busy in courts, through and through every time. But it is provided for in the Constitution. This is something that we get to enjoy. But now, this appears to be curtailing, a way of curtailing Kenyans' rights, because we assume that all politicians, it could be an assumption that all politicians have money. Yeah? Yet, even me as a voter who has no money, I should be able to challenge the election of my member of parliament, for example, if I feel there was something that I saw that didn't go right. Well, it is not easy to balance, because there are also timelines. It is good to also reduce the number of petitions in court. But how should we go about this?
It's a catch-22, Fred. First and foremost, it is true that sometimes Kenyans have reported to court with very frivolous cases, and we've seen some of them being thrown out pretty early in the day because of very glaring errors in the petition. However, at the same time, what is considered a lot of money in this country varies very wildly in this perspective. There are some people for whom their campaign itself was hundreds of millions, okay? If you looked at the proposed figures on capping on how much it would cost to campaign, for example, for governor of Nairobi, the IEBC had proposed a figure of 500 million, which to you and I is a figure which, if we took to our village, will be chiefs for life. You know what I mean? And therefore, that figure, when you look at how much it costs to campaign, seems small. However, when you consider, and this is my concern, the small guy, you remember the guy who campaigned on foot with a sweater, walking all over Central and getting people to vote for him? They didn't even have a cap. Can you imagine if he lost and he had to petition? What would have happened? Now, most likely, a guy like that, because a petition is necessitated by unfair competition, correct? So most often, the guy with the more money has the more capacity to be unfair. And therefore, if this guy with no money is kept from going to the courts, then that would be unfair. So what needs to happen is there needs to be a very serious balance as quickly as possible. And this balance must be that the courts must sit down and review what is a fair amount of money that is accessible based on who is likely to petition. That has got to happen, because there is a figure. For example, a presidential petition is 1 million shillings. Now, for Raila Odinga, that's a walk in the park. For me, it might not be. And those are the questions that we need to ask as a nation. But definitely we need to look at the amount of litigation that we do, but at the same time we cannot punish someone seeking justice.
Yes, because going into 2022, very few people will be keen to challenge, even when you know you lost unfairly. Moving to court is even more risky, don't you think?
Well, I'm worried. I actually agree with Mark largely, but I get worried about the fact that by hiking the fees, you are likely to encourage people to go through an election process with impunity, knowing that the loser is likely to be deterred because of the costs. And that is where the mischief is. And we do expect, as you just said, that they should standardize these figures. You can see some is 10 million, some is 2 million. How did they arrive at that? Yes. And most of these cases ended at the same time. I don't think it is more costly to do a case in Kirinyaga than it is to do in Kwale. Therefore, it should be a certain standard figure that as you go to the petition, you know there will be some levy if you lose. So that those who are committed and know that they have a good chance of winning will only present the petitions.
Could we accuse the judiciary of actually perpetuating an electoral injustice in this case? Because now, yes, it should be my right or a right of any litigant, any person who feels offended, to actually pursue this matter in court. If the other person decides to defend himself using very expensive lawyers, that should be his problems. Why should I be made to pay costs? Don't you think that this is an injustice to Kenyans?
Absolutely, and that's where the balance needs to come in as quickly as possible. You see, if I want to discourage you, then I go to a law firm that charges 500,000 per hour, and then you have 500,000 for the whole case period.
I'm probably representing myself in court.
Exactly, and those are the things that we need to consider. But for me, the journey is not just in terms of petitions alone. The journey has to have a review of how we do justice in general. Okay, I'll give you an example. There is a case in court concerning Oil Libya and some private Kenyans. Okay, Oil Libya has gone to seek the case be thrown out, and Oil Libya is being charged with removing, forcibly evicting these people, which is a crime outside of the contract, which is actually theft, because they removed things and certain things got lost. And therefore, because of their might and the smallness of these individuals, then the fees and everything, you just delay the cases. You understand? That basically if I'm paying 200,000 every time you appear in court, and I keep coming up with an excuse, I'm delaying justice. The other part where there is a problem, we've got power lines that are supposed to pass through Laikipia, where people were settled and they agreed and they signed with government. Then some brokers came back and said you can actually get more money, and they went to court and sued the government. Now power lines are not going through because the court system has been captured by those people who have individual
Don't
interest.
you think that this was a way to actually ensure that these things happen much faster? Remember previously, the number of people who were presenting election petitions in court was very high. Yes. Right now we're looking at about 388 cases, which is much lower. And going forward, we do expect, after what has happened this year, that they'll even go further down. I don't expect to see close to 400 people now going to court to challenge elections.
That's my point. You see, if we want to reduce the amount of litigation, then IEBC needs to get its act right. Secondly, the Director of Criminal Prosecutions must begin to prosecute those guys who've been caught performing illegalities. Okay? When you say there are illegalities, there was violence. Who has been arrested? There was ballot stuffing. Who has been arrested? A returning officer signed a form that had more voters than 700 voters as allowed in that particular polling station. Why haven't they been arrested? So we have to fix the system. That's the point I'm talking about. It has to be a systemic fix versus just fees.
Probably even that bill to actually change the way we elect the president, the way we elect prime ministers, it would help, because some of this IEBC appears a bit unable to conduct a clean process countrywide. There's always so many problems, so many complaints from it. Don't you think that easing the pressure on IEBC would actually help us. It plays into the bigger discussion of electoral justice. If at all IEBC is totally unable to conduct a watertight process, probably we should find ways of going around it. Don't give it too much pressure.
Well, to go back to the current election, remember there are many petitions that have gone through. This therefore tells you there is a problem with IEBC in terms of performance. And we need to look at it as Kenyans, that what do we do to ensure that some of those things are gotten rid of. Number two, you see, we just need to fix society itself. We have actually promoted impunity. Whether it is IEBC, whether you are going to use members of parliament to elect a president or prime minister, whatever the case, it is what is bedeviling our society in terms